All right. So I'll do my best to cue since I have some help with my slides today. So if we can just jump to the next slide, which is a little bit about me. Then I just wanted to give a little bit of context. My name is Janice Cunning. I'm in the hot and humid Toronto today as well, and I am a leadership coach and facilitator. And about 4 years ago, I co-founded a company called Fundraising Leadership, where I work with 3 partners, and we offer coaching and training and workshops really to help our leaders in the nonprofit sector grow. And I will say that I have a love and a background in the fundraising world. I spent about 17 years, mostly as a prospect researcher, and about 10 of those were working at KCI, the big consulting firm that I'm sure many of you have heard about. And so I basically, I'm excited to be here today. I'll tell you a little bit about my personal interest and struggles with conflict as we sort of go through. So let's jump to the next slide and we'll look at what we're going to focus on today. So really, I want to do these 4 things, like sort of get a sense of like, what do we mean by conflict? Because I think it is a word that can have different meanings, and there's positive and negative sides. So just to kind of get aligned on like, what do we even mean by that? And then we're really going to spend like a bulk of our time exploring this idea that people have different motivations when they're in conflict, using this total SDI, which is a tool that I'll tell you a little bit more about as we go on. And then there's going to be a chance for you to reflect and share in the chat box a little bit about like how you think you might be. And then we're going to think about how your colleagues might be and share some communication tips around how to better navigate conflict. So I really want you to walk away today with like a better understanding, hopefully of yourself, but also just like an awareness, like, oh, there's different ways of being in conflict, and having like some really tangible ideas of how. And it can be helpful too, like if you have somebody that you work with who you feel like you would like to improve a relationship, like you might actually have a person in mind as you're kind of exploring. We won't ask you to share that, obviously, but just to have someone in mind to make this a little more real. And I will say that I am not a person who like naturally loved conflict. Like often when we think about sort of like our upbringing and how we were when we were younger, it's not the most comfortable place for me. So that's where I'm coming from. And I feel like some of my coaching work and the leadership courses I've taken and then being introduced to this total SDI tool have like personally helped me to sort of see conflict in a positive light, which has been really nice. So, just to have a sense, like I'm certainly not a person who was born like loving to talk about conflict. It's been a journey that I've been on probably over, in particular, probably the last like 5 to 6 years in getting better at it. So let's jump into the next slide. This is really just a little context setting. So as I mentioned, the concepts of what I'm going to talk about today do come from a tool called Total SDI, which, feel free to Google it. There's lots of great information on their website and, sort of videos and ideas a little bit more behind what that is. But basically, I just want to set a context that we're talking about relationship awareness theory, which is really this idea that we want to understand our motivations and how our motivations drive our behavior. And we also want to understand that our motivations when we're at our best can be different than our motivation in conflict. So that's kind of what we're going to play with a little bit today. And, I love talking about SDI. So if anyone like afterwards has any questions, I'd love to connect and, share a little bit more about how impactful it can be for individuals and teams. So let's skip to the next slide and we'll talk about first who we are at our best, because this is kind of like a little bit of, again, context setting and grounding for us. So in SDI, there's basically the sense that there are 3 primary motivations, which then blend to kind of create like 7 different motivational styles. And at its simplest form, it's like there's people, motivation, performance, and process. And the people style, these would be people you work with who you would think about them and you think, oh, they love to help people. They're always wanting to help other people. They're very sensitive to like what other people on the team need, and they're probably the most likely to like speak up and show appreciation for other people. And then there would be people you work with who would be very motivated by performance. So they like want to achieve results, like have success, get things done. So they would be, they would enjoy like directing others, like being in charge of a project, running meetings. They would be very clear and direct in their communication and often like confident and really quick to make decisions. So very, you know, sort of used to kind of saying, this is what I want, this is what I think we should do. And then the final one is those who have a process style, which is, people that you'd work with who, they want to have order. They are often very self-reliant. They like things to be logical and fair. And in a meeting, for example, or a group setting, you might notice that they're observing, they're collecting data. They're the ones who probably often bring up the fact that, like, we need facts, we need data to support what we want to do. So that's just like a very broad kind of overview. I like too that there's sort of colors, so that can be a little bit of a shorthand, so we can think about, oh, blue and red and green, to kind of help us remember these. So I just wanted to set that context, and now we're going to jump into the idea of conflict. So let's go to the next slide. And these are just some of the costs of conflict, right? There's more. And actually, feel free to share in the chat, and we can learn from each other. But I think time often gets wasted on conflict. People sometimes leave organizations if there's a lot of conflict, which then leads to a need to like replace them, onboard them. There can be missed opportunities. And actually, I think it's interesting. Like sometimes I think, especially in the nonprofit world, we can miss opportunities because we're actually not willing to have differing opinions because we're kind of afraid of conflict. Maybe we're not actually handling conflict well. So that one's kind of complicated. It's almost more like a lack of conflict can create missed opportunities and probably also bad decisions. There might be less collaboration on a team if there's conflict. People might not be showing up for work, or they might be there but not really there. I mean, we've all been to meetings where people are there but not really there, And then there's also more personal impact like stress and strained personal relationships, which sadly then often comes home with people. So a lot of cost to conflict. So now basically I want to kind of separate, like, there's productive conflict and non-productive conflict. And it can, opposition versus conflict, there's many, many different terms, so let's not get too caught up in the terms. But I think it's just really important to remember, like, it's important to have a productive type of conflict on a team. Like, you want people to be able to disagree, challenge ideas, particularly if you're a manager, you want people to feel like they can actually tell you if they feel like what, a decision you're making might not be the best thing to do. And this can be really productive. And also it's it allows people to showcase like what it is that they care about on a team and within an organization. Now, on the flip side, I think we get into conflict that isn't very productive when we actually start to make it personal. So conflict can be both an internal and an external experience, right? So it's like if I'm at work and I feel like something, if I have a real value around fairness and I feel like there's decisions being made where it's like some people seem to be getting more than other people, within this workplace, then that can create an internal sense of conflict for me. Or it could be that I'm having a conflict with somebody else on the team because I feel like they are, dismissive, like they're sort of maybe mocking of my desire to have fairness on the team. So this is where it becomes really dangerous, right? Because this is unproductive kind of conflict, and we want to be able to have opposing viewpoints without making other people feel wrong or creating some sense that we don't value them. So I think even though, I will say, even if we're having unproductive conflict, it's still an opportunity because when somebody's in conflict, what that means is that there's something important to them that is happening. And so if we actually have better tools, and better ways of dealing with conflict, then we can actually uncover what it is that is important to the person and then actually get ourselves back to the place where we all want to be, which is us, being in our best self, which is the people, performance, and process, motivation. So then next we'll talk about how conflict starts, and there's many ways, but these are just some of the ways to think about it. And this is really key because one of the things we want to do is we want to start to anticipate, like, how can we actually avoid conflict and better understand each other so we don't actually get to the point where we're having it happen. So there's a way in which people can go into conflict, again, like if you have a strength and you're working on a team where it's like you don't feel you can use that strength, or it's being disregarded, or you're being forced to kind of like put on a mask and act in a way that's actually not natural for you. An example of that would be somebody might have a strength, like about being very principled, but other people might not appreciate that, right? They might be seeing that person as kind of like, oh, they're always unbending, which is the idea of kind of overdone strengths, right? So if we overplay or use in the wrong context the strengths and it's not landing well, then it can seem like we're creating conflict even though that wasn't our intended impact. And then again, like going back to this idea, like we all have different motivations. If somebody has a very people motivated style, like they're showing up at work with this idea, like I want to be helpful, that's what they come in the morning to do, like to be helpful, then they're going to feel conflict if people are being mistreated. So if they're at a meeting and somebody's being talked over or talked down to, that's going to be very triggering for them. If someone has a red style, which is the performance, then they're going to be in conflict when they feel like nothing is happening. Like tasks are not getting done, we're not meeting deadlines, we're not having success here, then that's going to feel very frustrating for them. And then if someone has a green style or a process style, like they're going to be in conflict if like order is being disrupted. It doesn't seem like decisions are being made logically, like last week we did this, next week we do this. There's no rhyme or reason to like what we're choosing to do here, and no way to kind of track our results and repeat things. And then finally, there's a group of people who then blend kind of like between these more evenly, and for them it's the biggest source of conflict is like there's no flexibility, like there's no options being considered here, and we're really all being locked into this decision. So that I have a close friend like that. It drives her crazy, So those are some of the ways that conflict starts. And then what we'll move to next is really like this idea of motivations in conflict. So we can just jump to the next slide. Yeah. So you'll notice the same colors, right? So here's the blue, here's the red, and here's the green. But when we get into conflict, what starts to happen is there's a little bit of a shift. So the blue style is now someone who wants to preserve harmony. So they're an accommodating style. The red style is I'm very assertive and I want to like prevail over obstacles. And the green is like, okay, I really want to analyze and slow things down. And again, like I'm simplifying this, to kind of bring these ideas to you, but there's also blends. So like in total SDI, there's really like 13 kind of styles that people can have in total. But, I think it's really important. So what I want to do is like have you start to think about and share like which might be you. So what I'll do is we'll just jump to the next slide, and I'm going to read you a scenario, and then I'm going to read 3 options, and I want you to just like listen and think about like which one sounds like the way that I would react in the situation. Okay, so this is the scenario. You have asked for and received an approval for a vacation request, and you've already booked your vacation and will likely lose your deposit if you were to have to reschedule it. Also, you've told your family that you're going on vacation, and everyone is very excited about this trip you're taking. You go to work, and your manager comes into the office and announces that all the vacation requests are on hold for the next 6 months, including those that have already been approved, so including yours. So I want you to think about which one of these three options sounds most like your reaction. So option one, you really want to avoid having the conversation with your manager because you can feel that they're under a tremendous amount of stress at this time. And also you're worried about your team and like it might not be, they might feel hurt if you're to ask for an exception to this rule and get one. So you decide that you're going to speak to your family and the travel agent and see if it's possible to reschedule to a better time. So that's option one. Option two is after the announcement, you head straight to your manager's office and tell them you really want to discuss this issue and find a solution. You advocate for yourself and explain the impact of having to cancel your vacation. So that's option two. And option three is you feel taken off guard by this announcement, so you go back to your desk and you start to process it. You call the travel agent to find out the impact of rescheduling. You call HR to see if you can get more facts about, like, why are they making this decision? Because it seems quite arbitrary. And once you feel clear that you have all the facts and you know what to do, you email your manager and ask to book a time to discuss the situation. So let's give everyone just a minute or a few seconds to pop in the chat, like which one, just 1, 2, or 3, which one do you think sounds the most like you? And some of you are probably thinking, I have no idea because it depends, which is very valid because then you probably have a blended style. But just, if you feel like in this situation there's one that resonates more with you and is more likely to be who you are, then let's have you share that. And Marina, maybe you can let us know when you have a sense of themes if they're emerging around
Sure.
what people are saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I am seeing a lot of number 3s.
Okay.
Yeah, and probably second to that is number 2.
Okay, cool. So we'll jump to the next slide so we can see then that we have, it seems like the majority then are in the analyzer category, which is where I live as well. So I get that. And then some asserters, yeah. So interesting. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so I want you to just, keep that in mind because what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of build on this and then we're going to do another little sharing. And so we'll go to the next slide, and I have a few questions I want you to either think about or write. You can write down your answers if you happen to have something to write on. And then I'm gonna ask you to share just like a little piece of this at the end. So for now, it's just really a self-reflection. So the first question is, when you think about yourself, and let's like particularly think about ourselves at work because that's the context here we're talking about. When conflict arises at work, whether it's like internal, you with one other person, or it might be like you're in a team meeting and a conflict arises, just ask yourself, like, what is it that I do when there's conflict? And just take a second to, just jot down a few things. So like, do you think? Like, that's what I do. I sort of, go in my head and start to think a little bit about like what's happening and why is it happening and how do we get ourselves out of this and that kind of thing. So what for you are the things that you're doing? So this would be things that other people could see, it would be evident that you were doing something in conflict. And then the next thing is to ask yourself, how do I feel? So this may not be evident to other people. This is more of an internal experience that you're having. So, do you feel like, oh, there's conflict, I'm engaged, I'm ready to go? Or do you feel like, oh, I'm actually worried, like it seems like something is happening here and I feel uncomfortable about it? So just a couple of words to kind of give yourself a sense of how you feel. And then the next question is, what do I want? So like, what is it you're trying to get now that conflict has arisen? Like, do you want to win? Does it feel like it's sort of a competition? Or is it more like, oh, I want to come out of this with this relationship with this other person intact or better, So it's like, what do you actually want now that there's conflict. And then the last question is, what is the best way for other people to approach you to resolve conflict? So like what do you want them to do or not do? And, so this might be like, I want people to listen to me, or I want them to kind of give me time, like I need some space here, or maybe I want to have them like acknowledge our relationship is important to them. So it's basically like if you were to give your colleagues a little user manual around how to deal with you in conflict, what would you put in it? And I actually think people should. That's something I think after this session, like feel free to do that. Let your colleagues know, like, oh, actually, when there's conflict, this is the best way to deal with me. So let's have a couple of people share in the chat. So what I'd love, and actually we'll just jump to the next slide so you can have a reminder of what the different styles are. If you can share, again, share your color, share your number, whichever way it's easier for you. So share if you were option 1, 2, or 3. And if you want to share like one tip, and we'll get Marina to share a couple of those with us once they come in. And I'll say for me, like I'll just share while we're waiting for people to have a bit of time to process. Like I find because I like to analyze, so naturally at my best, I'm actually a person who's really motivated by both people and performance. But when there's conflict, I move into this way in which I like to analyze. So I actually like when everybody's calm, like that's very important to me. Like I want things to be kind of calm and like have a sense like we're going to get through this, it's going to be okay, we have time, so that's probably like the biggest thing that I have to kind of help people understand about me is like I need this space to be created for me to be able to process in conflict. So what are we getting from other people, Marina?
Okay, and I want to thank everyone who's chiming in because the chat box and the question box is going so quickly I can barely read your answers. So if we don't respond to you personally, it's just because there's so many folks on the call today. So let me just try to read out a few of these. I want people to explain why their concerns are important to them so I can understand their values. Mm-hmm. I feel it's important to understand all sides before pursuing a resolution. We've heard some folks say they'd like time to process before making a decision. Someone says they need to feel listened to. Yeah, lots and lots of wanting to understand all sides, wanting to work together. Inform me of the conflict as soon as possible so that we can resolve it. Try to move the conflict to a controlled setting. Yeah, lots of good stuff here. Be optimistic, not threatening. Need to have an open mind and rely on facts to come to a decision.
Yeah, great, great. Yeah, so it's so interesting, right? Because it's like even within this little subset, that we are, like very different things that people want. Like there was one person who I suspect might have more of an assertive style, who was the person who kind of said like, let's get into it right away, like tell me right away, kind of thing. And then it sounded like, there was a lot of the other sort of colors, particularly a lot of analyzers. So I'm not alone here today. What style do you think you are, Marina? Do you have a hunch about yourself?
I suspect I fall into the accommodate category, probably with a bit of analyzing as well.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's jump on. Actually, we're going to go next to accommodate. So that's a good segue. So we're for the next kind of little bit, we're going to unpack a little more deeply like each of these. And I want to say that you're going to notice it says stage 1, and I'm going to kind of briefly at the end talk about there are 2 other stages, but stage 1 is the most important because it's where you start in conflict, and it's also where you want to resolve conflict. You actually don't ever want to leave stage 1, so that's why we're going to spend the bulk of our time here. So you might be thinking like, okay, well, that's interesting. Like I can reflect upon myself and maybe guess what style I have, but what would I do with my coworkers or colleagues or, volunteers or other people that I interact with? So of course, like we can't go around, analyzing everyone completely, but what we can do is like listen for clues. And I suspect many people on this webinar today like are fundraisers, so you're used to that with donors, right, or volunteers, like trying to figure out like what motivates that person, what might they like, what might be interesting to them, right? So you already have the superpower, so that's the good thing. So with someone who starts in the blue or accommodating style, you're going to notice like they are probably a little bit more likely, especially if something's not that important to them, to give in. Like they're the person who's accommodating, right? So they'll be like, yeah, no, that's fine. If you want to do it that way, then we can do it that way. If you ask them if they're upset about something, you might get a response like, no, I'm fine. There's no problem, and if there's conflict, particularly if you imagine you're in a staff meeting and suddenly like a big conflict arises, like even if they're not in it, they'll probably look uncomfortable, like there'll be a real sense that you can feel that they don't want to be here in the middle of this. So that's kind of like what you would be looking for to think that, oh, that person might, start in an accommodating style. And so then what we'll do on the next slide is we'll just look at like what then are the best ways to communicate with somebody who has this style then. So you really want to like affirm the relationship. Like you actually want to say like, we have a really great working relationship, and I'm really excited to kind of dig into this issue with you so that we can like, get through this and work together better in the future. Like you really want to like showcase that it's like, you're important to me, our relationship is important to me. You also want to depersonalize conflict, that like make it about the issue or the differing opinion that the two of you have, and not about like, you being of different value systems or, that kind of thing. Be calm and non-confrontational. I mean, that seems obvious for this style, but like really, and allow them to kind of lead the conversation, and then listen. And you might have to ask more than once. I find this is very common because, again, you get that like, no, I'm fine, there's no problem. So you have to actually create a lot of space for someone who's an accommodator to kind of come in and actually even be willing to admit that they're in conflict. So that might look like, if you're a manager, like if you notice someone on your team seems very upset in a meeting, you might go to them and say something like, I noticed that you were a bit quiet. I wanted to make sure that everything was okay. And if you want to talk about the meeting, I'm here for you. So you're kind of like allowing them the space and the choice to like step into talking about the conflict if and when they want to. So I would say like almost like creating space is like the tagline for this style. So then we'll move on to red. And so these are people, who want to be assertive in conflict and, kind of like, I don't know if enjoy, that might be overstating it, but it's like, oh, okay, good. It's like something's here. We can talk about it. We can move through it. We can get things done, right? So there is like a little bit of sense of passion that comes up here. There's definitely an urgency that you can feel from people, like when there's conflict, like, that in the scenario that I said, it's like, you get told your vacation is canceled and you like rush into your boss's office. That's a person who has that style. And then like during the conflict, they might be saying things like you understand, right? Or like we need to find a solution now. So their tone of voice, the words they're using, like everything is indicating to you like they really care about this and they really want to get it handled quickly. So what do we do to communicate with people like this? So we want to be confident and really be willing to give our own point of view. We want to be purposeful and direct. And we want to talk about, like, we're like focused on, okay, like there's an issue, we got to get through it, and we got to take action. So there's like less of a need here for it to be about like our relationship. I mean, they're okay, like if somebody has a more assertive style, they're not really that concerned because they feel like, oh, great, there's a conflict. We're going to talk about it. We're going to resolve it. We're going to move on. So you actually want to be like really energetic and passionate, because if you don't match their energy, then they can have a sense that like this actually isn't that important to you, which then, to them is more triggering actually than you being as passionate as they are. So that's the red style. And then we'll go to the green, which it seems many of us on this webinar today are. So again, it's like the analyzer. So this is like, you would notice people, if conflicts are arising, they're going to appear very calm. They might not be calm, actually. They might actually feel very upset, but they appear like that's sort of their sense impact they have. They could be tentative. They tend to be people in conflicts who like are bringing in logic. They want to talk things through in a sequence that makes sense. They want to talk about facts. They're a little more introspective, because they're processing and thinking. And they might say things like, oh, we need more time on this, like I can't talk about this right now, or why are we talking about this right now, or we don't have enough information to make this decision right now. So that's the kind of things that you'll hear from them that would make you think somebody's a green. So how to communicate with them. So what you want to do is you want to really respect their need for time to think. This isn't always possible, but if it is possible, then it is better to give them, even if it's like offering like 5 or 10 minutes to kind of ponder something before you have to talk about it, then that's great. You want to listen to understand and not to respond. So, we just talked about in red, like there's a need to match the energy. There's a need to match the energy here, and the energy is going to be very different, right? So you want to be kind of changing the pace so that it seems like this is a logical conversation. We're taking our time with it. We're both thinking about things. And listen first, and then sort of ask, like, can I give you my point of view? And again, like, so being calm, like it's sort of for a different reason, but the same thing is needed here, and putting our ideas in logical order. So I just want to like stay here for a second and because I don't know, like it might be coming up that you're thinking, well, what if I'm this style and somebody I work with is that style, right? Of course, like you're not likely to work with people who all have the same conflict or a style as you. So I think what is really important is we need to like both like claim what we need while also recognizing that in the workplace, like we have to be flexible and willing to like accommodate, other people's needs and styles. And this can probably, I think sometimes like it can be most obvious if somebody has like a red assertive style. And let's say they're in conflict with someone who has a green style. So we have an asserter and an analyzer. What will often happen is the person who needs time to analyze will actually create more conflict because they're creating like a sense that like this isn't that this isn't urgent, or that they're not really willing to talk about it, or they don't want to talk about it. And that just sort of, for the person who wants to get into the conflict, who has a red style, is actually making them more in conflict, right? So what we need to do, I think, is like we need to actually sort of say like, so let's say for me, as someone who has a green style, if I'm in conflict with someone who's more assertive, like I might actually have to say like, I know this is a crucial issue and we need to resolve it. And the best way for us to do that, like, is just I need like 5 minutes to compose my thoughts around it, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to have this conversation. Okay? So I'm like claiming what I need, but I'm also matching like their sense of passion and urgency for this. Then, the same thing, like if we have someone who's accommodating, and let's say you're a manager who naturally has like a sort of assertive style, like you might have to really self-manage yourself and say, like, I need to give that person space. I need to ask that person in different ways to be willing to have them open up for me, right? So it can feel like sort of a little bit unnatural, but that's work, right? It's like we are all different at work, and so it's like we need to claim our own space, but at the same time be willing to adjust to other people. Particularly if you're a manager, like if you have people on your team, then I think you have like an even greater responsibility to do that. So why don't we pause, Marina, and just are there questions popping up that we can answer a few, and then we'll kind of go into the last couple of points.
Sure. And I'm not sure if you want to take this question now, Janice, or maybe later, but when we're talking about accommodating with different styles, we had someone asking specifically about they are more of a blue accommodating style themselves, and they work with a red assertive manager, and they were wondering if there's tips for sort of making that conflict, I guess, a little bit easier.
Yeah. I think the first thing is just actually knowing is helpful, because sometimes what can happen is if you're, especially like, I don't know, like that we're going to talk about sort of where you go, but if you're starting in blue and you don't get to red until like the third stage, when you see someone who's assertive, you can kind of make up a lot of stories about that, right? Because it's like you have a different perception of the world. So I would say, like, first of all, hopefully just kind of knowing like it's not personal, that's their style, right? It actually has nothing to do with you, is a good starting point. And then I think it's also if you want the relationship to be different, I would say you probably are going to have to be willing to challenge yourself to be more assertive about what you need. And you can certainly share that if you feel like, you can have the kind of relationship where you can kind of share with the person, like, this is something that I recognize about myself and I want to step more into it, and get support around that from somebody in your organization. But I think if you, like, this is the thing, if everybody, no matter, that's what I was saying, ideally the managers, I think, should be more willing to accommodate to, like, the needs of their team. But if you're here, so you're learning this today, and if you want to take responsibility, then I would say, challenge yourself to kind of be a little bit more direct in what you want.
That's great, Janice. And we just had a question as well. On the slide, it indicates, let me just make sure I have this right, communicating with first stage green. What does the first stage refer to?
Yeah, so we're going to go there right now, actually. Yeah.
That's a good segue
anything else?
then.
Are there burning questions before I go there, Marina, or we're good?
No, I think that's good for now. Just folks, do keep putting your questions in. We are going to have a Q&A at the end as well, so we'll get to as many as we can.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So let's go. Yeah, the stages. Great question. So yeah, like I said, we've been focusing on stage one for a few reasons. Like, one is because it's where it's where you start. It's also where ideally you actually want to stay in stage one and deal with a conflict in stage one and get out of it. Like, that's the ideal. We actually never want to be in stage two or stage three, and I'll explain why that is. So in stage one, we care about ourselves. We care about the problem, whatever issue it is that we're in conflict about, and we care about the other person or other people, depending on what situation we're in. So again, it's like we can accommodate, we can assert, and we can analyze. There's no better or good place to be. Like, these are all perfectly good, perfectly wonderful places to be in our first stage of conflict. It's just like you have to just have some self-awareness. You might need to kind of let other people on your team know if you think they have different styles from you, but we're not trying to change anybody, right? It's like your style is your style, and you can harness it and make it work for you. Now, if we go to stage two, then what happens is we actually stop caring about the other person or other people in the conflict. So, we're still focused on ourselves, and we do want to resolve the problem. So it becomes like, if, like, let's say, for example, if you have a blue style in first stage, like you're being accommodating, which can be a very positive and empowering place to be, right? Like you can be a person on a team who's more flexible, kind of willing to listen to different points of view and like kind of encourage other people to make a decision that is, you know, a little bit good for everybody, right? So that's a strength. Unfortunately, when you get to stage 2, then you're often like giving in or deferring, you know, which is not really what you want to be doing, right? And if you have an assertive style in stage 2, which I actually do, it's, you know, I'm analyzing at my best, and then suddenly if things escalate, then I'm in fighting mode. You know, I'm kind of like, like putting out my points and like you know, like all my bullet points and trying to build my case, and you know, it doesn't get as pretty. And then if in second stage of green, it's actually like there's more disengaging that's happening, right? So you're sort of not, you've moved from analyzing to disengaging, and that can obviously be more noticeable and have a bad impact. Then the third stage, you actually stop caring about not only the other person, but the problem, right? And I think for a lot of people, especially at work, we don't get to third stage very often, thankfully. So you might like literally think about specific times in your life where you actually got to that point. I mean, I kind of jokingly say often, like, it is a little bit like if you think of it like two people in a relationship, a personal relationship, like this could be the fight where you've been fighting about the dishes and suddenly you're fighting about everything and you don't even know what dishes are, you know, like that makes sense, I think, to most people, right, Marina? Like,
I think so.
it's not about the dishes, you know, or you don't remember, like you're in a fight that's like so crazy and you're bringing up all the things from the past and you can't even remember like where did this fight start, like, you know, where were we 5 minutes ago. So that can look like giving up, fighting, or retreating, and it's really like primal survival mode. Like it does not feel good at all to be here. You feel like, you know, very out of control. You're really just trying to get out of the situation with yourself intact, you know, kind of thing, because that's all you care about is yourself. And I think what can be really challenging is that sometimes I like the metaphor, it's like a simmering pot, right? So if we have a conflict at work that like is ongoing and we actually are never willing to like step in and talk about it and resolve it, then the pot is simmering. And so you could go into a meeting with somebody and they say something and it's like you're still cycling through stage 1, 2, and 3, but because there's a simmering pot, it's like you can go to the boiling point very quickly. So that's the danger, right? Like this is the problem with us, like not having the skills and kind of capabilities to actually understand how to be in conflict and like be willing to like adapt our behavior to suit other people so we can actually address things, is that we end up walking around with this simmering pot and then we throw ourselves like into really difficult you know places where we're in stage 2 or stage 3 before we know it. So that's the sequences. And then the final thing.
Janice, I wanted to jump in there for a sec,
Yeah.
actually. Just, Julie, if you could just back the slide up once, that's great. Could we just address conflict stage 3 for blue and green seems somewhat similar. Can you explain maybe what the differences are there?
Yeah, I mean, it can, so I think it is a subtle distinction, but I think giving up is really like, it looks like, well, that's fine. If that's the way you want to do it, like, you know, like let's say you've been in a meeting at work and you're trying to make a decision about like who's going to be on your campaign cabinet. If you find yourself in stage 3, you might be like, okay, that's fine. Like if you think he's the best person, then we'll have him. The third stage for green, the retreating, is more like I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like it's literally like retreating, which can be physically like leaving the room, or just can be kind of emotionally like you might just shut down in the meeting and not actually be willing to say anything more. Or you might say like, I'm not willing to talk about this anymore.
That's great. I think that's helpful. And the other question I wanted to ask here is, do you often see people switching styles at different stages of conflict, or do people tend to stay within one color?
So it's a good question. Like, so the idea is kind of with both with kind of who you are at your best and who you are in conflict. It's kind of like this is the way you are, but a lot of people blend styles. Like that's why I was saying like these are sort of the primary three, but there's 13 variations of this. So for a lot of people, they might have a stage one where they actually they could go blue or they could go green, and they would sort of not even consciously, but more subconsciously choose, whether they're going to do one or the other, depending on the situation, how important it is to them. Some people, if they have blends, like they're sometimes different in their personal life than they are at work. Like they might feel more kind of, willing to be accommodating at home, but at work there would be more space for them to analyze. So I've had people kind of tell me like it's like sometimes they do make choices. They can see that they've made choices even though it hasn't been a conscious thing that align kind of like with the situation. And it's not uncommon to blend. So that's why, it's sort of like if you're feeling like, well, I'm not sure where I would be in that, that's totally fine because you probably do have a blend. It's very likely.
That's helpful. Thanks, Janice. I think we can keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the other thing is you might also think you're in stage one, you might be in stage two. Because sometimes people think like, oh, but the conflict just started, and it's like that can be the simmering pot. Like you might have switched into a different stage without actually, these things are not that, when we're in conflict, it's like we're not that good at sort of, we're not looking back and going like, oh, that's exactly what happened. Like 5 minutes in, this happened. It's a little bit hard to distinguish. So, all right. So the last sort of piece that I want to do is I actually want to like kind of make a link back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is like our motivational value system, which is just a fancy way of saying like who we are at our best, right? So when we started at the beginning, we talked about like there's three main motivations are people, performance, and process, and then the people who sit in the middle, which is a lot of people sit in the middle. It's actually the biggest style. They're about like perspective and flexibility. So in this little image, what we're seeing here is that there are four people. So we're looking at the little arrowheads, right? So all of the people in this scenario are in the green style in terms of their first stage of conflict. So they are people who like to process and analyze. But basically, they're all trying to get back to their best selves, right? So if they are, so the person who's sitting at the top left, who wants to get back to the blue style, like they're thinking, but they're actually thinking about people and how they can be helpful in this situation. Somebody who's sitting in the middle and has gone into conflict is thinking like, how do I get back to a place where, we can look at options and keep our options open and have flexibility? The person on the right is thinking like, how do we get back to doing something? Like, how do we get into action? And then the person at the bottom, they're sort of staying, right? So they haven't made as big of a shift. Like they've gone from being a process person to an analyzer. So they're thinking about like what is logical here. So as I said earlier, like I'm in conflict. I go to green as my first stage, but I am naturally a blend of like people and performance. So it's important for me to kind of let people know that. There was a time I can think of, like, I was sitting on a board and I thought, like, I can sometimes look like I'm actually not caring about people when conflict arises because I kind of go within my own head, right? So it can look, I can even be like physically sitting back in my chair, like maybe I'm crossing my arms and I'm kind of burrowing my brow because I'm thinking, but I'm actually trying to think about like how do we move forward together, like because these relationships are important to me. I really care about these people, and how do we make a decision and get something done? But my kind of impact on the room can be to imply that I'm not actually thinking about that. So it is very important to kind of realize that, especially if you have a more analytical style. I remember I used to kind of have to like keep myself forward, in my chair. So it was like I was creating this perception, like I am engaged, I'm here. The person who just asked the question, like, what's the difference between like the third stage, of blue and green? It's like that retreating can be like as subtle as just kind of starting to opt out, like stopping talking, sitting back in your chair, kind of going within yourself. That's quite common, and that can be that can be sort of off-putting to other people if they don't realize that that's you actually processing. They might think that's you not caring. So yeah. So why don't we'll just go to the next slide, and then we have some time for some more questions. And I'll just say, just to give people a little bit of time to type them in. My information is here if you want to follow me on social media or send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And also just to invite you, as I mentioned, I'm part of a 4-person team at fundraisingleadership.org, and we'd love to have you join our community. It's free. You can just go to our website and click on that. And we have lots of free resources and webinars, and we also do a great weekly blog and podcast, and we've this year started to add more and more guests. So we have some inspiring nonprofit leaders who come and guest blog and join us on the podcast, so we get to learn from them.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Janice. And I second that. Janice's website is awesome, and there are many, many good resources there, and her podcasts are great as well. So definitely go and check that out for more information.
And maybe you could pop that in the chat, Marina.
I absolutely will. Yes, absolutely. Let's get you started on it.
Because it's kind of a long URL.
It is. I'll just get you started on answering a question, and then I will get that in the chat box. So from someone asking, they struggle a little bit with not taking conflict personally. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I'm thinking that person maybe has a blue style. It is it's a good question. It is kind of a tricky question. I mean, I think that if at work, as I said before, like I think the most powerful thing that we can do is kind of ask for what we need, and so, and you might just start with like sort of one colleague, and as you feel more comfortable, like share a little bit more. But that could be something you could ask for people, like if you feel like people are approaching you and there's a conflict, to kind of let them know that you're going to be much more like open and receptive to talking about that if they can kind of just affirm, that the relationship is important or that they value you. And you can put that in a way that feels right for you. But I do think there's nothing wrong with like asking for what we need, in conflict.
Oh, that's a great point. And then how can we best understand what motivates our coworkers? And maybe tying into that, there were some questions about whether this Total SDI tool, if there's assessments that are available that could be done as a workplace team.
Yes. So Total SDI is a suite of tools that I'm certified to deliver, and there's lots of people across the country who would be certified, and you can reach out to me and let me know where you are, or go to their website. And I would say that, I'm not sure if I said this, but I'm glad somebody asked this question, because sometimes I think we overcomplicate it. So it's like, of course, there's kind of the things that you can pay attention to and listen for to kind of get a sense, but there's also nothing wrong with actually asking someone, those questions that I had you sort of ponder earlier, like, what do you do when there's conflict? How do you feel? Like, what do you want? And how should people approach you? Like, that's and I do this when I do SDI workshops, and, teams really love it. You could do that like at a team meeting, like just actually, say like, oh, I was at this webinar, and, it's really interesting to kind of think about how we could be better, with each other in conflict. And then like you have to have some trust. I mean, this is, obviously you want to think about like how you kind of set this up, right? Because it is a little vulnerable for people to share. But I think generally I find like teams really enjoy, and it can be done in kind of a fun and playful way that makes people laugh. Like a lot of times people have a very green style will say, like, don't ever come and talk to me, just email me. And everyone laughs. It's kind of fun. So feel free to take those and like take that on as like a team exercise.
I think that's a great point, Janice, and I love what you said about not overcomplicating things. I think sometimes we forget that, don't we? We're
Yeah,
so
we can
cued
just ask
in.
people what they want.
Yeah, we're so cued in to try to like read body language and read between the lines, but sometimes it's good just to be clear. And I'd also like to say too, of course, when we send you the video recording for this, you are welcome to share that with anyone. Could be anyone in your network or anyone in your office or on your team, or if you wanted to set up and watch the session with your team and then do a little bit of a discussion around it, that could be a great option as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
We had a question from someone who identifies in the red assertive zone and was wondering if you had any tips on how they could tone down their red.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it would depend. It really depends on what the other person's style is, right? I mean, if you have another person who's red, then you don't have to tone down your red. Like, actually, you'll both be really enjoying, talking about things that are conflict. So I think if you had, let's say you have someone on your team who has a blue style, it really would be like start with affirming the relationship. That's really the key. Like, our relationship is important to me. I really value you as a colleague. Like, I always enjoy working with you, something like that, right? And if the person has more of the analytical style, then I would say the biggest thing, those two often that can be triggering is like to say, to create more space for them. Like, don't, sometimes what a red style does is they're so like, oh, something's come up and we should deal with it. They kind of barge into someone's office or fire off an email versus like saying like, oh, it feels like it'd be helpful for us to have this discussion and let's set up a time. Because if the other person can prepare, then they're going to be like much more willing and excited, to talk about the issue.
Yes, and that brings me to another question. Is it easier for folks with the same style to resolve conflict, or does that really matter?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I've had people say to me when I've done team workshops that they were surprised that maybe there was somebody on their team who had the same like motivation style as them at their best, and that they didn't actually, they might not be the person they best get along with. I haven't really had people mention it in conflict, but I will say, like, this is only going to take us so far, right? Like, when that person said that to me, my answer to them was sort of like, I mean, there's personality and kind of like we come from different places, like especially with conflict, like we have experiences in childhood and throughout our lives that kind of shape how we feel about conflict. We come from like we have diversity, we come from different places, like so this is only like one piece of a big puzzle. So I think it's like maybe not possible to say because I think there could be too many factors at work. Also, like just what kind of history do the two of you have together at work?
No, that's great. I think that's helpful. And Janice, I think because we're on the hour, I think we're going to end there. Did you have any final comments you wanted to leave folks with?
No, I did. Well, maybe I'll just leave, like I said, like it's not. I love talking about conflict because to me it's not that easy, and I'm sort of on a constant challenge to push myself in this direction. So I'll leave people sort of maybe with the hope that I think like having tools and thinking about it can make it more appealing if it's not your natural thing.
I absolutely agree with that. I think you've given us a really helpful new approach to think about, and I want to thank you for that, Janice. Thanks for joining us today and presenting all this information.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to remind everyone before we sign off that we are going to follow up with you by email this afternoon or tomorrow morning with the webinar recording and the slide deck. We had some questions about this as well. Yes, the webinar recording will have closed captioning, but it may take us just a little bit longer to get that set up. So while you will get the email quite quickly after this session with the recording, you may want to check for the closed captioning tomorrow morning because it does take us a few hours to get that together. We will also have a short survey in the email that takes less than 5 minutes to fill out. You'll have a chance there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. We'll also be sure to share your feedback with Janice as well. So anything you'd like Janice to hear, please pop it in there. Our next free webinar is coming up next week on the 18th. We're going to be discussing toxic workplaces, which some of you may be interested in. There will be a link to register in the email that we send out later today. So if you are interested, please do join us for that one. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, for bearing with us as we persevered through some technical issues. And we so appreciate it. We hope that we'll see you again next week. Have a great day, everyone.